Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named The Twilight Zone, 1985, Season 1, Part 2. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The 12th story begins in a futuristic sci-fi city with buildings spaced at regular intervals. In the distance, there's a pyramid-like administrative center and towering residential skyscrapers. Inside one of the apartments, a candle on a cake automatically lights up. Today is the birthday of the boy, Dickie, and his father hopes his son will make a wish. Dickie excitedly announces he wishes to get a good grade on the government test next week. The smiles on both their faces fade since that seems like an odd wish. His mother quickly explains that it shouldn't be his birthday wish. A good performance on the test would be fine. There's no need to overthink it. Dickie looks confused. At school, everyone's been talking about it. 3 or 4 kids have already finished the test, and they all say the questions were easy. Dickie just hopes he can make his parents proud. The father lifts his son up, repeating not to worry about it, while Dickie only cares about acing the test. The mother quickly changes the subject, slicing the blue cake. Dickie covers his eyes with his hands. A black gift box is placed on the table, and he eagerly opens it to reveal an ohm encoder. Dickie excitedly hugs his father, thrilled that he can now call his friends. The encoder has so many new features, but he's only 12, and he won't be eligible to use it until he's 14. The father explains that the government changed the rules last month, and after passing the test, a number will be assigned to him. The mother stares hard at her husband, and the father looks back helplessly. That night, thunder and lightning crash above the city. Dickie is curious about what the test is for. The father explains it's just an intelligence test. The government wants to know how smart he is. Dickie thought it was like the school tests. They should be studying more the night before the test, but both parents want him to relax and have fun. As the rain starts to pour heavily outside, the mother is especially worried about the test. The couple is tense, afraid their discussion might disturb Dickie. The father tries to comfort her using words but not muscles yet, but the mother knows that Dickie is different from the other kids. The father clearly knows this too, but can only reassure himself that Dickie will pass. The two of them embrace using their muscles, anxious. Dickie steps out. The rain has thrown a wrench into their plans. Originally, after the test, there was plenty of time to play. They were planning to go to the park or the zoo, but now they can't. Why does it always rain at night? The father can't answer. Dickie just wants to get his ohm encoder number by the afternoon. The mother interrupts, hoping her son will have good luck on the test. Dickie confidently promises that he'll pass. He's never caused them any trouble since he was born and will never disappoint them with his results. The mother hugs Dickie tightly, speaking in a strange, choked-up tone that she loves him. It's just a simple test, so why does it feel so emotional? The father takes Dickie to the test center, and the mother's expression is unusually sad. The weather, coupled with the important test, feels like an omen of something. The two walk down the futuristic hallway, where everyone wore nearly identical outfits. Rows of transistors stood upright in the center, and everyone was busy with preparations for the test. The waiting area was filled with men and their children. Dickie approached the staff and gave his name, receiving an identification number. He could only enter when his number was called. The atmosphere in the testing hall was tense, with parents trying to reassure their children not to be nervous or worried. Suddenly, a woman called out Dickie's name. During the test, the father could not stay in the waiting area. The government would notify them at home within a few hours. The woman explained some instructions, and the father almost wished he could give his son some kind of lucky charm, reassuring him not to worry about anything. Dickie promised once again that he would complete the test. A man took a vial of liquid from the desk, and Dickie was led into a room. The heavy metal door slammed shut behind them. After confirming his identification number, the man instructed him to drink the liquid. This wasn't like the tests at school. The liquid was meant to ensure he answered all questions honestly. Dickie wondered why he would ever need to be dishonest, but the man assured him it was just a precaution. He told Dickie to sit in the chair and answer the questions. The man checked his pupils one last time before leading Dickie to the screen. He told him to carefully think about the questions and speak the answers aloud. With all instructions given, Dickie was ready. The test began. Outside, the rain continued to pour, adding to the already heavy atmosphere. The mother stared blankly out the window, while the father anxiously waited beside her. Suddenly, the phone rang, signaling the completion of the test. The two of them smiled and held hands, hoping for a good result. A cold, mechanical voice came through the machine, announcing that Dickie had completed the government test. The results were as follows. Due to Dickie's exceptionally high intelligence, which exceeded the government's set limits, the family had 2 options. Either the government would arrange a state burial for his body, or they could hold a private funeral. The couple collapsed into each other's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. The truth was finally revealed. This is the future world where IQs couldn't exceed the government-set standard. Due to the law, they couldn't have been informed of this in advance, and no lies could be told during the test. Dickie was sentenced to death, and the couple lost their beloved son forever. The 13th story begins with a girl named Charity from the 18th century, running a fever and hearing the roar of a car engine. At first, she thought it was thunder, but then she saw an unknown beast roaring. These were images on the television screen. Meanwhile, a boy named Peter lay in bed, sweating profusely, as the doctor noted his temperature was a staggering high degrees. The drainage issues along the Hammond Creek had caused a bacterial infection, a problem that had occurred before. It felt almost like a cycle repeating itself. Peter suddenly opened his eyes and saw a woman standing by his bedside. Confused, he asked who that was. His father didn't understand what his son was talking about because there was no other woman sitting there. The doctor suggested it was likely a form of delirium, which would disappear as his temperature came down. The woman gently wiped Charity with a towel, and Peter immediately felt a cool sensation. The woman asked if she would like something to drink. Peter asked for some orange juice. The woman thought Charity was just babbling, possibly a sign that her condition was worsening. Charity's hand felt soft, almost as if touched by divine grace. Meanwhile, Peter lay in the courtyard, and the woman brought him a glass of tangy, sweet orange juice. After confirming his temperature was dropping, she hurried off. Peter closed his eyes and once again saw the scene, the moment Charity drank the water. Peter suddenly sat upright in his chair and asked who she was. Charity, startled, dropped the cup, wondering why she could hear the boy's voice in her head. Peter introduced himself, speaking aloud from a distance. After a brief exchange, they discovered they both lived in the same area, not far from the Bear Rock by Hammond Creek. However, Charity had never seen any other houses nearby, and this area hadn't had any new residents for over a century. Peter asked what year it was. Charity recalled it being 1700, while Peter was in 1985, nearly 300 years apart. Charity couldn't help but laugh at how absurd it all seemed, and Peter couldn't understand what was going on. They could see and hear everything the other experienced. Peter pointed up at a plane and showed it to her. Charity was amazed, asking what kind of bird that was. Peter quickly explained, "It's a kind of transportation." Charity smiled sweetly, wondering how humans could fly in the sky. Peter, seeing her reaction, took a sip of his drink. Charity instantly felt the sweet tang as well. Since their senses seemed to synchronize, Peter had an audacious idea. He grabbed all the snacks and indulged in them, eating chocolate ice cream, unable to resist the temptation. Charity suddenly grew curious about what Peter looked like. Shyly, Peter went to the mirror and locked eyes with his reflection, seeing his handsome face. However, his standards of beauty were vastly different from what people would consider attractive today. Peter, too, wanted to see Charity. Charity walked to the stream and looked down, seeing her own delicate face reflected in the water. Peter now understood what true beauty looked like. Charity shyly shook her head in denial, but to Peter, no one could be more beautiful than her. Their hormone feelings for each other were slowly blossoming, and they could now see each other's world. While Peter was washing the car, Charity was out in the field planting vegetables, bringing some joy to their otherwise dull lives. Her neighbor came to her house to fetch water. Most of the wells had been polluted, and the plague was tormenting everyone. The neighbor claimed these were ominous signs. A lack of devotion was the root cause, and only prayer could purify the contaminated water. Every era had its share of such people. Charity told her neighbor about the world she saw when she had a high fever. Hundreds of years from now, cars wouldn't need horses to pull them. There would be devices that could capture music and boxes that allowed people to see others. Peter quickly added that humans even made it to the moon. The neighbor was stunned, then hurried off with the water bucket, thinking she was crazy, but Charity couldn't help but laugh her saliva off happily. That day, Peter left his classmates as usual, and Charity thought he should spend more time chatting with friends. She herself spent most of her time working. In reality, Peter didn't have many friends, having skipped grades since he was young. He thought his life had settled down, but even in the new classroom, his social relationships remained unstable. Charity envied the life of reading books because they were so expensive, and she couldn't afford to read much. Peter hurried to the school library as soon as he heard this. It was like heaven for Charity. Peter was more than willing to be her eyes, and she could read as much as she wanted. The first book they read together was Romeo and Juliet. Afterward, Peter took her on a journey through the sky. Through his eyes, Charity saw magnificent buildings. It was a free, new country. Charity also tasted wine for the first time, and she immediately became lightheaded. Her father couldn't understand why she was laughing so happily. Soon, Charity was drunk. Her father rushed to put her back to bed, and the next day, Charity complained non-stop about Peter's poor behavior. After convincing her father to let her get out of bed to work, the neighbor suddenly made a terrible claim, publicly declaring that she was possessed by the devil in 13 states. Peter broke out in a cold sweat, realizing that only the water from Charity's house was fresh, and she was the only one to recover from her fever. Peter cursed himself for being so stupid and quickly urged Charity to tell her neighbor it was all just a story, but it was too late. The local gentry had arrived, having received word that Charity was a witch. Her father strongly disagreed with this accusation, and a scuffle broke out. When her father was knocked to the ground, Charity rushed to help, but Peter couldn't even stop it. While her father was indeed strong, he couldn't save his daughter from being taken away. He could only feel angry at his own helplessness. They were soon escorted to the doctor's office. The gentry wanted to speak with Charity alone. Once the door was locked, he stared at her beautiful face, pressuring Charity to admit she was a witch. Even when she swore before God, he refused to believe her. He told her that unless she removed her clothes, they wouldn't be able to check for witch marks. Charity immediately remembered a girl who had been forced to do the same and had cried non-stop. The gentry dismissed it as tears of gratitude, saying only by taking off her dress could he fully search her. As he moved to unbutton Charity's dress, she slapped him hard and quickly ran away. He threatened that she would face a public execution by fire for this. Charity ran to Bear Rock, her breath catching, tears in her throat. Peter should have realized by now. Charity didn't blame anyone. She just knew she was living in this era. Peter hated himself for being powerless. The gentry was not only a well-known local aristocrat, but also the town's judge. Charity couldn't run far. At most, she could avoid him by following the scent of deer, but soon hunting dogs would be on her trail. Peter suddenly had an idea. The colony's books might have described the history of the 1700s, but after hours of searching, he found nothing. No one had been tried for witchcraft around that time. These records weren't complete, and if he couldn't prove Charity's innocence, it would mean death. Just then, Peter saw the name of the same gentry. Upon confirming that this was the same gentry mentioned by Charity, he found that the book described the gentry's history. He had been tried and convicted for the deliberate murder of 2 sailors and had died naturally in 1704. Charity remembered the 2 missing men. They had been carrying a large bag of gold to trade with the gentry, but the gentry claimed he'd never seen them. The book detailed the motives and specifics of the murders. With Peter's suggestion, Charity went to the trial. The entire town gathered to watch. She swore on the Bible that everything she said was the truth. No matter what traps were set with words, Charity denied all accusations. As for the story of flying through the air, that was a blessing from God, giving her a second sight. One day, people would travel this way, and with this power, Charity had uncovered a brutal murder. The crowd began to stir, and Charity went on to describe the details of the 2 murders, even revealing where the bodies were hidden. The gentry's jaw dropped in shock. Charity stopped there, and the gentry had no choice but to admit the truth. He denied the accusation of witchcraft and swore not to speak of any harmful claims again. With that, everything was settled. Charity and her father embraced, their excitement overwhelming. That night, Charity realized what they had done was wrong. No matter how carefully they spoke, there would always be something missed. She didn't want to worry her family any longer. It was better if they stayed in their own time. Peter should have friends besides just her. He had shown her a world she'd never seen before, and she would live out her life with it. Before Peter could say goodbye, Charity severed the connection. Peter lay helplessly in bed, no longer hearing the voice in his mind. No matter how hard he tried, there was no response. A year later, Peter had made many new friends and started a fresh life. He wondered if the events he experienced were real, until one day he heard that familiar voice again. Charity had left a message. It was hidden between the jaws of Bear Rock. Before Peter could speak, the voice disappeared again. It was certainly an important message. Peter rushed to the familiar waters of Harmon Creek. The water no longer felt as pure, and buildings like shopping centers and residential complexes had sprung up along the banks. But Bear Rock still stood in place. Peter eventually found the spot, pushed aside the rocks, and discovered a heart-shaped symbol with their initials written inside. This 285-year-old friendship and first love would forever be sealed in the 2 dimensions. The 14th story begins with a playwright, Maury, who is being chased for rent. Unlike well-known playwrights, he's the type who doesn't make a single penny. While his landlord, who sells fish, bought himself a luxury car, Maury is still clinging to his pitiful dream, unable to pay 2 months' worth of rent. The landlord couldn't help but ask about his work. "How long does it take to write a play?" Maury answers, 6 months to a year. The landlord replies, rejecting his script can happen overnight. That simple comment cuts deep, and Maury doesn't argue anymore. Every day he struggles between his dreams and reality, hoping to write a hit script that will finally change his life. In their tiny office, Maury and his old friend discuss the next plot, but they accidentally push each other to the edge. They've been in this business for 22 years, with 17 scripts rejected. Every time, they create with hope, thinking this one will be the one. But they still haven't moved out of this damp office. The friend says this is what dreams are like. He can't let that fish seller defeat him. Just then, inspiration strikes. The friend begins performing the lines animatedly, and Mori writes the script based on his description. Before he gets too far, the friend suddenly collapses from a heart attack. Mori takes a long time to realize he's on the brink of death. Even if he calls a doctor now, it's too late. In a hurry, the friend pulls a pendant from his shirt. It was a talisman given to him by a monk in Myanmar. He used it the last time the plane he was on crashed. The ancient war story is real. Whoever owns the pendant can make one wish. The two are partners and the best of friends. He hopes Mori will use his wish to save his life. Before Mori can respond, the friend's pain intensifies. He keeps urging him to act quickly, saying he's going to lunch soon, and then he tilts his head and collapses. Mori, heartbroken, holds his dear friend, about to use the pendant to make a wish. Just then, the landlord knocks on the door to collect the rent. The situation is now urgent, and Mori struggles to make the wish. Why is there only one wish? Usually it's 3. He could settle for 2, one for himself and one for his friend. Seeing his hesitation, the friend opens his eyes. Mori tries to encourage him to hang on, but it's clear his friend is dying. The broken pendant only grants one wish. Mori desperately wants to use this opportunity to save him. Their bond is stronger than that of brothers, but as a playwright, this is his last chance. In the end, Mori makes a wish for himself, to become the best playwright. The pendant shakes uncontrollably, and suddenly, a force surrounds him. In the blink of an eye, he's transported to a strange place. His appearance has changed, except for his bald head. The room is filled with wooden furniture, and at a desk sits a man. Mori realizes he's been transported to the Middle Ages. He wants to open the window to see what's outside. The man angrily demands to know who's there. Mori turns and is shocked to see the man. It's none other than Shakespeare. Shakespeare initially mistook Mori for a servant. If there were Egyptians around, he wouldn't be able to write. Mori still hadn't recovered from the shock when Shakespeare began to call for someone to have him thrown out. Mori quickly explained that he wasn't a servant and even picked up Timon of Athens from the floor. Shakespeare was surprised that Mori could read and went on to explain that Timon had drained all his inspiration. Nothing interested Shakespeare now, and while Timon might be considered a masterpiece in the future, he couldn't write it out at the moment. Mori felt that this was a waste of time and a huge mistake. Without Hamlet, there would be no drama. Shakespeare, confused, asked what Hamlet was. Mori clarified, "It's Hamlet." Suddenly, Shakespeare seemed intrigued and wanted to know more about the play. But Mori wasn't in the mood to create in the Middle Ages. The pendant had misunderstood. He didn't want a secret collaborator. He wanted a play that could make it to Broadway. But now, everything was too late. When Shakespeare asked him questions, Mori explained that he had performed Hamlet in high school. After outlining the plot, Shakespeare started to create based on the inspiration, but didn't mention the ending. Mori told him the original ending, which made Shakespeare very pleased, proposing the two of them could collaborate on Hamlet. Mori didn't want to stay in this time period. As for the lines, he only remembered "to be or not to be," and immediately grabbed the pendant, hoping his old friend would come to his rescue. Shakespeare snatched the pendant from his hands, and Mori quickly begged for it back, but Shakespeare said they could discuss it once the script was finished. Shakespeare then spoke into the pendant, asking for Mori to help him write. Mori broke down. In the puzzled gaze of Shakespeare, Mori clutched his head, knowing that saying "wish" would grant one. Suddenly, memories flooded his mind, and he began speaking lines from the script, unable to forget them even if he tried. Shakespeare patted Mori, signaling him to sit. Mori slowly walked to the desk without a typewriter and sat down helplessly in the chair. Shakespeare handed him a quill and moved aside, ready to direct him to begin writing Hamlet. If Mori had the chance to save his friend, he wouldn't be in this situation. But there was no turning back now. Mori again reminded Shakespeare it's Hamlet, not Hamnet. The 15th story begins with a group of men playing cards in a room. Initially, it seemed like an ordinary card game, but soon the stakes grew higher than just money. Jack spread his cards across the table with a mocking grin, asking who could possibly beat his hand. Nick threw down a full house, causing everyone to gasp in disbelief. Peter couldn't help but question Nick's identity. The group was used to playing together, but Nick claimed to be Norman's cousin, here to replace his sick relative. This left Jack puzzled. He was about to get another beer from the fridge when he noticed it was completely empty. As the homeowner, Peter was supposed to provide the beer, but it had all been drained by the others. Tony started handing out the cards, instructing everyone not to reveal their hands until it was time to bet. Then Tony noticed something strange. Nick kept drawing sixes. Peter raised an eyebrow and asked why Nick always had sixes. Nick just shrugged. Marty, deciding he had enough, folded his hand and went to the kitchen to get some headache medicine. But when he returned, Nick had drawn yet another six. Jack couldn't hold back and questioned what was going on. Nick had an unusual number of sixes. Nick hadn't even realized the pattern, so he discarded his hand. The group, now suspicious, began whispering among themselves. There was no way someone could keep getting sixes every round. Everyone knew what 3 sixes meant. Tony immediately thought of evil and Satan. If they wanted proof, they just had to check Nick's bottom card. Peter, intrigued, flipped Nick's cards over. 3 sixes stared back at him. Tony quickly covered Jack's smelly mouth, who was about to scream. This only confirmed that Nick was indeed the devil, but the question remained, why was he playing cards in this room? Peter decided to make a phone call to confirm things, but then Jack suddenly had a realization. Nick was there to take one of their souls. Peter, as the owner of the room, was the most likely target. However, Jack also felt a sharp pain in his chest, leading him to hastily assure everyone that he was perfectly healthy. The terrifying part was that no one answered the phone on the other end. Just then, Nick walked back into the room and the group immediately grew wary. Norman wasn't at home because, as Nick explained, he wasn't actually sick. He had passed away. The trio froze, eyes wide in shock. Nick explained that he had come across an interesting game and didn't want to disrupt the atmosphere. All the winnings could be taken back with him. Peter was annoyed that Nick hadn't introduced himself properly, and Nick apologized for that. However, he then mentioned that one of them wouldn't be able to take their winnings. The group tensed up again, wondering who it could be. Nick teased, keeping them in suspense. Jack was speechless. Surely the devil wasn't this cruel. Since they were all natural players, Nick proposed they settle it with another game. Each person would pick one card, and the one with the highest number would lose their soul. Reluctantly, the 3 agreed. Nick arranged the cards in a row. Tony was chosen first to reveal his card. He hesitated, wanting to pull Marty in to lower the odds, but was told that Marty would only draw a low card. Innocent people like him would be safe. Trembling, Tony selected the 8 of hearts. Jack picked the 7 of spades, grinning widely. Then, it came down to Tony and Peter. Peter slowly drew a card and flipped it over. It was the Jack of spades, meaning Peter was the one who would lose his soul. Jack rushed to reassure Peter that they would clean the house properly, so Peter didn't need to worry about the mess. Tony also promised to call Peter's wife, since both he and Peter were secretly hoping the other would die sooner. Peter realized that this card game was being manipulated, much like a magic trick. Nick didn't offer much of an explanation, and now Peter was about to leave with him. Tony couldn't help but speak up, trying to gain a chance for him. Nick declared that this was the end, and Jack stepped forward to support Tony's argument. Maybe in hell, things were already decided, but this was New Jersey, and things worked differently here. Nick raised an eyebrow, asking what Tony had in mind. Peter immediately proposed a one-on-one game to settle it once and for all. Nick agreed, eager for a challenge, and the two were ready to face off at the card table. Peter put his soul on the line, while Nick casually slid 18 onto the table. Nick said 3 sixes equals 18, sounding entirely reasonable. But Peter raised the bet to 19, prompting Nick to push $1 more into the pile. Peter now took charge of how the game would be played, a low hand game. Nick's expression darkened. Tony quickly realized the strategy. Normally, the player with the highest card wins, but in a low hand game, the player with the lowest cards wins. This meant the goal was to keep the cards as low as possible. If Nick kept drawing 3 sixes, Peter had an easy chance of winning. Nick, now serious, announced the game's start. 2 cards were dealt to each player. Marty, who had been out briefly, returned to his seat. Peter slowly revealed his card, the 5 of diamonds. Marty, still confused by the stakes, stared at the 2 players in disbelief. Peter drew another card, another 5. Nick, however, had already drawn 2 sixes. The group exchanged a quick, nervous glance. The next card for Peter was another 5. With 3 5s in a low-hand game, Peter was in trouble. Tony quickly reassured him not to panic. If Nick draws another 6, they still have a chance. Sure enough, the next card was another 6. Peter drew for himself, hoping for a miracle, but it was yet another 5. This felt like a one-way ticket to hell. Tony insisted there was still a slim chance. Nick's hidden card hadn't been revealed yet. If Nick had 4 sixes, he would win, but the odds of that happening were 1 in 10,000. Nick slowly revealed his final card. The temperature in the room seemed to freeze. No one had expected this. Nick had drawn the death card. His wide-eyed glare at Peter was a silent warning. It was time to leave, and no one could move until he did. The group could only watch as Peter slowly walked toward his fate. Marty, still clueless, tried to touch the card, but the moment his hand made contact, Nick was powerless to stop it. A blinding white light filled the room. The death card slowly transformed back into its original form, the 6 of clubs. Nick sighed and shook his head, clearly frustrated. It's revealed that he had tried to fool them, but Peter had actually won the game. Marty was still too confused to understand what had just happened. No one respects a cheater, not even the devil. Nick apologized for losing control, saying he's the devil, not a man. The trio, now furious, stepped forward to confront him. Nick clapped his hands and a strange sound echoed throughout the room. He said this was their compensation. The normal process wouldn't be like this, but he was a generous guy. With that, he turned and walked out of the door. The group was stunned to find that the kitchen was now filled with an abundant feast and the fridge was stocked with beer. The summer celebration was officially underway. They had returned from the realm of the dead, and now it was time to enjoy the fruits of their victory. The 16th story begins with a store clerk, Maddie, unexpectedly slipping into a dead woman's shoes, and as a result, her entire demeanor changed. She immediately lashed out at the man who had been harassing her, throwing her old life and work aside. She then got into a car and headed straight to the villa. The driver tried to ask for the fare, but Maddie threw her entire wallet at him. She then strangely rang the doorbell. When the housekeeper opened the door, she was shocked to find a stranger standing there. Without a word, Maddie picked up the dog lying on the floor, cradling it like a mother. The housekeeper didn't recognize her at all, but Maddie simply stated that she needed to take a bath. Afterward, she wanted to see the dress burned. As she tried to head upstairs, the housekeeper blocked her path, saying that no one could just walk in without the permission of the house owner, Kyle. Maddie mentioned something that shocked the housekeeper, something that only she and the mistress knew. Maddie promised to keep it a secret, and with that, she headed into a room. As she was about to turn on the faucet to run her bath, Maddie instinctively took off her shoes, and she looked around, confused and disoriented. At that moment, the housekeeper rushed into the room, holding the wallet the taxi driver had returned, which contained Maddie's identification. Maddie nervously asked where she was. She was just working in the store, and now she was here. The housekeeper quickly asked if the secret was something the mistress had told her. But Maddie had no idea who the mistress was. The housekeeper threw Maddie some clothes, telling her she'd better leave before she called the police. Maddie hastily grabbed the clothes, but she couldn't find her shoes. The housekeeper spotted the high heels on the floor, saying those were Susan's shoes. Maddie quickly explained that they were from a secondhand store, and the housekeeper didn't think much of it, telling her to put them on and leave quickly. The moment Maddie put the shoes back on, her entire demeanor shifted, becoming elegant and noble. She then instructed the housekeeper to burn the clothes. The housekeeper stared in disbelief, her suspicions growing stronger. Maddie, now in expensive clothes, stood in front of the mirror, but when she looked at her reflection, it wasn't her own face staring back. In a law office, the secretary reminded Kyle that a woman had called claiming to be his wife. Kyle immediately looked up, alarmed. He said now was not the time for jokes. The secretary was puzzled. This woman sounded like she knew him well and even accurately mentioned his girlfriend's name. Kyle quickly grabbed the phone, and the woman's voice was eerily familiar, yet strange at the same time. Kyle explained that his wife had died in an accident a month ago, but Maddie completely disagreed with his statement. Kyle warned her that this kind of behavior was considered harassment by law, but Maddie didn't care about the threats. After all, how could he threaten someone he had already killed? His face darkened with murderous intent. He then asked where she was. Maddie confidently replied she was at home and had already prepared the Manhattan cocktail just the way he liked it. It's the last bit of it she had left, just for him. Her smile sent a chill down Kyle's spine all the way to his smelly butt. He hung up the phone quickly and rushed back home. As soon as Kyle entered, he saw Maddie lying on the couch with the Manhattan on the table glaring at him. Kyle, no longer the calm and collected man he usually appeared to be, grabbed her and demanded answers. Maddie burst into a manic laugh, saying this was what her husband really looked like. Enraged, Kyle slapped her across her greasy face. His eyes fell on the shoes, the ones he had given his wife. It was these very shoes that Kyle's wife had been wearing the night he pushed her off the balcony. Kyle lied, claiming that his wife had drunk too much and in her drunken state had accidentally fallen off while dancing to TikTok music. The police had bought the story, but Maddie had a much deeper understanding of what had truly happened that night. At her words, Kyle suddenly laughed, thinking Maddie was just trying to scare him. But the next moment, she tongue massaged him forcefully. That familiar sensation surged within him, yet it wasn't his wife. She had to be dead. He had pushed her off that balcony with his own hands. His wife's eyes had been filled with fear as she fell, seeing only the starry sky above her. Before Maddie could continue, Kyle rushed to the side, attempting to pull a gun from his bag. Maddie, quicker on the draw, aimed her gun at him. She shot once, grazing his body, but he scrambled to run away. Maddie paused to admire herself, then fired again, this time missing entirely. The housekeeper heard the gunfire and quickly called the police. Maddie ran after Kyle, shooting at him once more. This time, the bullet also missed. Kyle, too focused on escaping, didn't care about the car anymore and ran wildly. The click of her heels echoed like a typewriter. Maddie fired once more and missed again. Kyle was already halfway over the fence, and Maddie tried to chase him but was slowed down by her shoes. Frustrated, she threw off her high heels and looked around, puzzled. She still had the gun in her hand, and she covered her smelly mouth in surprise. Realizing it was the shoes causing all this chaos, she didn't hesitate to throw them into the trash bin. The sound of sirens grew louder. Maddie quickly fled the crime scene. A police car pulled up to the house, and the officers, after hearing Kyle's story, found it too outlandish to believe. But with suspect information, they could apply for a warrant. Before they left, Kyle begged them not to let the news get out. It could ruin his career. He promised to hire security guards to watch the house in case the madwoman came back. The police agreed and left. The house was no longer safe, and Kyle didn't need the housekeeper's services anymore. He promised to pay her a severance fee. The housekeeper then asked a strange question: if he believed in ghosts. Kyle dismissed everyone and sent them away, leaving the entire house empty, just him inside. Later, while a maid was taking out the trash, she stumbled upon the expensive shoes in the bin. Thinking they had been discarded by some wealthy woman, she eagerly put them on. The spirit of the deceased returned, her face contorted into an eerie smile. The gun still lay in the grass. Kyle's late wife picked it up and slowly walked toward the familiar villa. She easily pushed open the unlocked door, and not long after, a gunshot rang out. This time, Kyle wasn't so lucky. The moment he had pushed his wife to her death, he had already crossed into the realm of the dead. The 17th story begins with Danny walking home alone at night, when the bushes beside him began to rustle eerily. When he looked ahead, he was stunned to see his high school crush standing right there. Before he could enjoy the moment, two monstrous figures holding chainsaws suddenly leapt out. Terrified, Danny stumbled backward, about to run, but he was knocked to the ground by one of the boys. The masked figures turned out to be just a prank, designed to make him the laughingstock of the town. His classmate, Leanna, who witnessed the whole scene, saw her opinion of Danny plummet. His reputation at school was on the line. Danny helplessly watched as his rival, Eric, took his crush in his arms and left, with two of his lackeys following close behind, delivering the final blow. Despite all his anger, Danny could only accept his defeat. As Eric had said, Danny really was a coward. At night, he had to keep the TV and radio on, and every light in the house had to be turned on. A woman entered Danny's room, feeling helpless. Danny was 13 now, and he shouldn't be this afraid. She turned off all the devices and left, leaving the room in darkness. Suddenly, the curtains jerked, causing Danny to panic and force himself to sleep. But just as he was about to close his eyes, the bed shook. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, but then the bed began to shake violently. His mother downstairs might think something was wrong. Danny hurriedly looked under the bed, and an eerie sound echoed. His eyes widened in horror as a giant dark figure slowly rose and took on a human shape. Danny froze in terror as the creature moved closer. The shadowy figure rasped, saying he would never harm the master of the bed. Then it opened the window and left. The next morning, Danny shared the strange events of the previous night with his best friend, who thought it was just a nightmare. As they approached the school, Danny overheard some girls talking about an incident the previous night. Two students had been attacked in the park, and the tall, thin assailant had broken one of the boys' arms. The boy's description matched the figure Danny had seen. Tall, thin, dressed in all black, with an eerie, lifeless presence. Danny immediately thought of the shadow from the night before. That evening, Danny set up a camera under his bed, watching intently. As he was about to fall asleep, the shadow reappeared from beneath the bed, repeating its words that he would never harm the master of the bed. Danny quickly snapped a photo, but the camera malfunctioned, the flash failing to capture the critical moment. The shadow had already been posted in warning all around town, and students were buzzing about the madman who had been terrorizing the town, disturbing the nightlife. Danny wanted to ask his best friend for advice, but the shadow had appeared 5 nights in a row. Even if he told his family, no one would believe his smelly bullshit because he was known as a coward, and this was probably all just his imagination. Desperate, Danny invited his best friend to witness the phenomenon, but no one dared go out at night. Meanwhile, the tension between Leanna and Eric grew, and her grades were slipping because no one was helping her with algebra. Danny asked Eric to help Leanna, but Eric quickly turned down Danny's request, asking if he was trying to get himself killed by going out at night. But Danny saw an opportunity. That night, when the shadow appeared again, Danny asked if he wouldn't really hurt him. When he received confirmation, they both stepped outside. Danny soon arrived at Leanna's house. Since Eric wouldn't help her, Danny decided he would. The fact that he was brave enough to venture out on such a terrifying night was proof of his courage. Leanna quickly pulled him inside, while the shadow watched quietly from a distance. By the time Eric realized what had happened, Danny had already won Leanna's favor, and the girl had walked away from him. Danny became the bravest man in town, and many people wanted him to walk them home. His friend approached, asking to talk privately. The night before, the shadow had killed the guy who lived next door to the friend. The friend was starting to believe Danny and thought they should expose the truth to prevent further harm. But Danny no longer wanted to do that. No one would believe it, and besides, he had finally earned the respect he deserved. Now, everyone was at his beck and call. Even Leanna had fallen for him. What happened to the town didn't matter to him. With that, the two friends parted ways, their bond broken. Eric suddenly appeared, interrupting Danny's thoughts. He couldn't take Danny's arrogance any longer. Though his father had warned him not to make a move before the semester ended to avoid getting kicked off the swim team, Eric didn't care anymore. Danny didn't back down either. He had worked hard to build his reputation and wasn't about to lose it. He suggested they settle things tonight at 9 p.m. in the park, the place where the shadow was often seen. That way, neither of them would risk getting expelled from the swim team. Eric hesitated, but eventually agreed, and Danny couldn't help but smile smugly at his success. As Danny styled his hair to look more mature, the shadow slowly rose from under the bed, repeating the familiar lines. He would never harm the master of the bed. Danny had grown used to it by now, and reminded the shadow to close the window when it left. The clock struck 9 p.m., and Danny had been waiting in the park for a while. Just as he started to think Eric wouldn't show, Eric actually appeared, ready for the showdown. Danny greeted him coolly, trying to appear calm, and then quickly maneuvered behind a nearby building. Eric, eager to fight, charged at him, but Danny kept retreating until he reached the swings. At that moment, the shadow rose behind him. Eric froze in fear, and Danny grinned, watching him. Eric scrambled to run, shouting at Danny to hurry up. The roles of the cowardice had reversed. He even tried to warn the shadow to chase Danny, but the shadow only moved closer to him. Danny, frustrated, muttered for the shadow to hurry up, but the shadow didn't respond. Suddenly, a hand shot out and grabbed Danny by the neck. Panicking, Danny cried out that he was the shadow's master and that the shadow had promised not to harm him. The shadow's raspy voice came from deep within its form, saying he was the shadow hidden beneath another's bed. As a chilling laugh echoed, Danny struggled, but his breath faded. The abyss gazed back at him as he had once gazed into it, and in that moment, when he had reveled in the respect the shadow gave him, he had already crossed into the realm of the dead. The 18th story begins with Dr. Dennis unexpectedly discovering a small path with a fence marking the area as private property, strictly off limits. However, his car breaks down on the road and he has no choice but to climb over the wire fence to seek help. The town is perched on the cliffs by the coast, with the towering lighthouse standing out against the darkening sky. By the time Dr. Dennis reaches the town, night has fallen, and the eerie silence around him feels unsettling. He calls out loudly and knocks on the door of a local grocery store. Suddenly, the harsh lights flicker on, and the owner, Cooper, looks at him in disbelief. The town doesn't welcome outsiders, but Dr. Dennis apologizes for the intrusion, explaining that he just needs to use the phone to call a tow truck. Cooper tells him there's no phone in the town, people here don't use them, and reluctantly lets him in to warm up. The town is far from the coastal road, and there are no cars. He'll have to make plans for the next day. At that moment, a young boy, Teddy, walks in and notices the unfamiliar man. Dennis introduces himself as a doctor, but Teddy looks confused and asks what a doctor is. Dr. Dennis assumes Teddy is joking, but the boy's puzzled expression makes it clear he's not. Cooper interrupts their conversation, explaining that Teddy's sister has a slight fever, but their mother insists it's nothing serious. The townspeople are afraid of getting sick, and their medicine supply is running low. Dr. Dennis picks up a bottle, but Cooper coldly instructs him to sit down. Dr. Dennis asks if there's a hotel nearby, but Teddy says his family has an extra room. Cooper had originally planned to keep Dr. Dennis at the store, but now he has no choice but to let him stay the night. As they leave, Teddy tells the doctor that he hopes the lighthouse passes by him. Confused, Dr. Dennis asks what that means. Cooper explains that it's just the town's way of saying goodnight. Dr. Dennis carries his bag and knocks on the door of Teddy's house. The wife, Anna, eyes him suspiciously, as no one wants strangers around their children. Dr. Dennis suggests that perhaps he can check on their daughter since he's a professional doctor. Anna refuses outright, insisting that her daughter will be fine soon. Dr. Dennis doesn't press further. The sky turns an eerie shade of purple, and the light from the lighthouse slowly moves, casting a strange glow into the room. Anna is startled, her hands trembling before quickly looking out the window. Teddy nervously points out that the light is on, and the villagers are all watching, anxiously waiting to see where the light points. Everyone is visibly tense. The light finally returns to Anna's house, and it feels as though an eye is watching them, cold and unblinking. The villagers stand emotionless, watching, their faces showing both relief and indifference. Anna sees the light shine on her daughter's face, and she breaks down, unable to control her emotions, clinging to her son and crying uncontrollably. As the lighthouse continues to beam, Teddy calls for Dr. Dennis. He enters, looking deeply troubled. The girl's condition, which wasn't too serious at first, has worsened because of the strange light. Dr. Dennis quickly reassures them that getting sick is normal. Teddy urgently pleads for Dr. Dennis to help his sister. Dr. Dennis grabs his medical bag and examines the girl, determining that it's just a mild respiratory infection, and with the right medication, she'll be feeling better soon. Teddy peered out into the hallway, urging Dr. Dennis to leave before his mother finds out. Dr. Dennis, confused, asked why. If his sister is sick, it's a family issue, but now it feels like they're violating something. Dr. Dennis had no idea what Teddy meant. Back in the room, Teddy pointed out the window. Dr. Dennis pulled back the curtain and saw the villagers, each holding a lantern, slowly approaching. They were waiting for the lighthouse to take someone. But why would the lighthouse want the girl to die? There's no clear pattern. Whichever house the light touches, someone inside will soon die. If no one is sick, an accident will happen instead. Now, it seems they've made the lighthouse angry. Dr. Dennis understood the implication. Teddy said that a man named Seth is protecting them, that he watches over them from above. Dr. Dennis immediately wanted to know how anyone could have the right to decide someone's life. Despite Teddy's repeated pleas to stay away, Dr. Dennis was determined to find out more. Just then, they heard Anna and Cooper's voices outside. Teddy finally decided to take Dr. Dennis to the lighthouse. Anna entered and checked her daughter's forehead, surprised to find her temperature had dropped. Cooper looked shocked. The girl had inadvertently revealed that Teddy had brought a good man. Cooper rushed into another room, only to find that Dr. Dennis had already climbed out of the window and was heading outside. Cooper quickly followed. Teddy led Dr. Dennis to the lighthouse, but no matter how much they pushed or hit it, nothing changed. Dr. Dennis looked up, seeing nothing. After some difficulty, he finally learned from Teddy that Seth had died a long time ago. Now, he was a spirit guarding the lighthouse, watching over the town. Anna and Cooper arrived just then, and Anna immediately pulled her son away. Cooper elaborated further. Seth was the lighthouse keeper, the father of all the townspeople. The town was founded 200 years ago, and Seth had shown them how to survive from the land. The lighthouse attracted many ships, and during those tough times, it was survival of the fittest. More and more villagers surrounded Dr. Dennis, and Seth had vowed to protect the town with his spirit. Cooper's job was to ensure everything ran smoothly. Dr. Dennis questioned whether it was Cooper controlling the lighthouse, to which Cooper replied that he only checked it once a year and that the light was lit by Seth himself. But Dr. Dennis reasoned that the machinery could break down and the light could be random. So it wasn't all Seth's doing. Cooper argued if the expected victim didn't die, an accident would occur. How could that be explained? Cooper angrily retorted that Dr. Dennis didn't understand anything. The town was isolated from the outside world, and everything was possible because of the lighthouse's power. The bloodline had to remain pure. Whatever it demanded, the townspeople would give. After hearing this, Dr. Dennis felt that the whole town had gone mad. Inbreeding was incredibly dangerous, but no one was listening. The villagers slowly closed in on him. Cooper spoke of the consequences of defying the will of the lighthouse. There had once been a soul chosen to die but survived, causing the town to fall into extreme hardship. It wasn't until the ancestors swore that the lighthouse would never be rejected that the town recovered. Since then, no one had escaped its will. Dr. Dennis shouted that their daughter had done it. She survived. She didn't die. The villagers closed in further, and Dr. Dennis found himself with nowhere to run. When the light shone on Anna's house, Dr. Dennis was inside at that exact moment. Since he had stopped the lighthouse's will from taking its toll, he would have to pay the price. No one could escape the lighthouse's power. The villagers completely surrounded him, and chilling screams echoed through the air. The 19th story begins with a man, Dan, accidentally discovering a camera in a box. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was a Kodak 100. He and his girlfriend, Becky, couldn't suppress their smiles. This was likely the first truly modern camera, inexplicably hidden away, and it still had film inside. Given how long it had been there, the film should have been ruined, but the camera was in remarkably good condition. Dan began to develop the photos one by one. The first picture had the time and location marked on it, an Indian village with two men sitting on the ground near a fire. The following photos, however, were full of eerie images of Native Americans. The year was 1913, over 70 years ago. To have captured these photos was almost unbelievable. Becky felt chills just looking at the photos. Dan decided to show them to a university professor who he believed would definitely be interested in them. Dan had just packed up the photos and headed out when, not long after, Becky suddenly heard a chicken scream. At first, she thought she had imagined it, but then another chilling cry echoed through the house. She froze, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. The hallway was eerily quiet, and the sound disappeared again. Becky carefully walked into the living room, but found nothing unusual. As she cautiously peeked around the corner, she heard the sound of something falling behind her. Fear gripped her as she pressed herself against the wall, then decided to cautiously explore the hallway in front of her. Meanwhile, Dan was talking to the professor about the photos. He deduced they were taken by a National Geographic expedition team in 1913 in the Amazon River basin. However, the professor shook his head in disbelief and said that wasn't possible because he was one of the team members. Dan had never heard him mention this before. In January 1913, the professor had traveled with a doctor to the village of Kurukai, considering it to be just another adventure, until it nearly cost them their lives. The Kurukai people had strict spiritual beliefs. If they created an image of someone, like a painting, it was considered a way to imprison the person's soul. When they discovered the true purpose of the camera, everyone became terrified, and the equipment was destroyed. The expedition team had to flee the village in a hurry. In those dangerous jungles, escaping the natives was not so easy. The professor reminisced about that unforgettable night. The Kurukai would communicate by mimicking the sound of the wind while stalking their prey. Despite having guards on watch, the photographer was still killed by the Kurukai, and no photos were ever taken. But Dan clearly saw those photos in the camera. He quickly handed the photos to the professor, who recognized the village immediately. 2 of the doctors were in the photos, and the professor himself appeared as a child just 70 years ago. Hearing the old professor joke about his younger self, Dan chuckled as well. But then the professor suddenly grew puzzled. He asked where the Kurukai were. Dan quickly grabbed the photos back. The Native Americans in the pictures had disappeared. The expedition team was still in the photo, but the Indians were gone. There should have been 5 or 6 of them. Suddenly, Becky's figure appeared in one of the photos. Dan quickly hopped on his bike and raced home. He rushed through the back door and into the kitchen, where the vegetables on the table were only half chopped. Something was definitely wrong. He called out repeatedly, but there was no response. The birds in the cage had flown out. He shouted upstairs, but then a loud roar came from behind him. When he reached the living room, he found the place in chaos, and the plants in the corner were trembling slightly. Dan cautiously approached and pushed aside the leaves. To his shock, an Indian man was hiding inside. Startled, Dan tripped and fell, only to realize the floor had been set up with traps. He painfully pulled a fork out of his back and quickly ran for the door. At that moment, Becky's voice echoed from upstairs. Dan spun around and charged up the stairs, only to be tripped by the traps and nearly impaled by a sharp glass. Terrified, Dan scrambled to his feet. Everything was part of the Indian's plan. From now on, he had to be extremely careful. He hurriedly pushed open a door in the corner and found Becky in the darkness. Above them, an Indian man had been waiting and lunged at him. The 2 of them tumbled out of the room and onto the ground, with the woman dizzy from the struggle. Dan seized the camera and swung it wildly, using his right hand to repeatedly strike the woman behind him. Despite his efforts, he was overpowered and knocked to the ground. They wrestled their muscles on the floor like a powerful leopard pinning him down. During the struggle, Dan accidentally snapped a photo of the Indian, and to his surprise, the camera seemed to trap the Indian. He took a moment to process this, clearly realizing that the Indians had actually come out of the photos. Just as he was about to carry Becky downstairs, an Indian man lunged at him from the room. Dan quickly pressed the shutter, sealing him inside the photo. Becky was shocked and wanted to ask what was going on, but Dan motioned for her to shut up her smelly mouth and then pushed open a door nearby. 2 Indians were in the process of starting a fire. Before they could react, they were sealed inside the camera. The 2 of them started down the stairs, but the Indians rushed up after them. Becky used her sonic wave attack, and Dan used his free hand to seal one of them, but the man behind them lunged again. Dan quickly kicked him off and sealed him in the photo. The Indians were experts at hiding and ambushing, but luckily they hadn't hurt Becky. Dan quickly grabbed her and they ran for their shitty lives. A door suddenly slammed shut behind them, sending Dan on high alert. He quickly snapped another shot, but there was no enemy behind the door. Just as he relaxed his guard, he pushed open the door and was tackled by an Indian, one who was clearly the largest from the photos. Dan's size was no match for him, and he was pushed into the grass. Becky grabbed a wooden mallet and swung it, but it had no effect. All the Indian's anger was directed at Dan. Becky urged him to use the camera, but the film was already used up, like a gun with no bullets. Then, Becky remembered there was another camera on the table, but just as she realized this, the man charged at Dan, choking him. While Becky was frantically trying to fix the broken shutter, the Indian picked up a fork from the ground and slowly advanced on Dan. At the last second, Becky managed to put the pieces together and hit the shutter. Dan barely escaped death, and the brutal battle finally came to an end, with all the Indians sealed away. From this experience, they understood that ancient maps, including those of uncharted lands, offered no warning of danger. The 20th story begins with a troubled writer digging up the treasure he had buried as a child when the sky suddenly turned a chilling shade of blue. His fingers worked furiously through the dirt. Finally, after much digging, he unearthed the buried toy soldier. As soon as it surfaced, a strange gust of wind began to blow around him, and the moon was quickly swallowed by thick, dark clouds. The hurricane intensified, the scene in the sky growing ever more eerie. The lights in the house flickered on, and the writer found himself in a suit, staring in shock at what was behind him. A car from decades ago appeared next to him, along with a familiar suitcase on the ground. The old swing, which had long been broken, creaked and swayed. Terrified, he dropped the flashlight onto the ground and rushed to the window. To his horror, he saw his younger self, Gus, being scolded. Due to his habitual shoplifting, Gus was finally caught by the shopkeeper. His father, Lou, couldn't understand this behavior. Others might think they couldn't afford things, causing them to steal. It had brought shame to the entire family. Lou began to unbuckle his belt, and they went into another room for a lecture. The writer couldn't bear to watch. When he glanced at the other window, he saw himself being beaten, his body bruised and battered, while his mother remained silent. Lou threw the belt onto the table, breaking down in tears. Clearly, he didn't want to do this. It was the first time the writer had seen his father like this. The next day, while Gus was walking down the street, a group of boys who had been lying in wait jumped out to beat him up. Gus ran straight into the writer, his grown-up self, and the two shared a moment of eye contact that transcended time. Gus didn't notice anything unusual, and the boys, frightened by the writer's fierce gaze, mistakenly thought he was part of a gang. They quickly fled in fear. Gus went into his usual store, and the toy soldiers on the shelf caught his eye. He wanted to grab one while the shopkeeper wasn't looking, but it turned out to be a feint. Gus quickly withdrew his hand and pretended nothing had happened. When the shopkeeper turned around again, Gus snatched one of the toys. Suddenly, the writer appeared in front of him. The writer stared at him for a moment before walking away without saying a word. Gus understood the unspoken message. After hesitating, he reluctantly put the toy back. The writer continued watching from a distance as Gus swung on the old swing. Just as Gus was about to cross the street to buy an ice cream, the group of kids ran over, dragged him down, and began beating him. The writer didn't think twice. He dropped his ice cream and sprinted toward them. He grabbed the bully leader and warned him not to do this again. After Gus calmed down, the writer handed him a handkerchief to wipe his face. He insisted that they tell his parents and clean up his wounds. Gus tried to make excuses, saying his father was too busy, but the writer firmly stated they would go together. He then introduced himself. Gus, surprised, revealed that he had the same last name. The writer smiled, saying it was just a coincidence, and their bond grew stronger. When Gus, battered and bruised, faced his father, Lou struggled to control his anger and demanded to know what happened. Gus explained, but it was pointless. This had happened 5 times already. The writer stepped in to vouch for Gus, and only then did Lou allow him to go wash up. After Gus left, Lou expressed his gratitude to the writer for everything he had done for his son. Gus was always causing trouble, even pushing his friend off the roof of the garage. The writer explained that it was just a pretend stunt, an attempt to fly with the bushes as a cushion, harmless fun, but Gus's father couldn't understand it. He didn't think it was funny. Lou had a nagging feeling that the writer seemed familiar, such a rare surname, especially in this small town. The writer explained that he was a writer visiting from Los Angeles to find some inspiration. With that, Lou's doubts were put to rest, and he extended his hand for an introduction. The writer responded with polite words, but they carried a deeper meaning. At that moment, Gus was playing a ball-throwing game when the ball bounced back and nearly hit the window. Thankfully, the writer was there just in time to catch it. If the glass had broken, his father would have been furious. The writer accidentally mentioned that he knew it would happen. As Gus remained puzzled, he suggested they head to the store to chat while grabbing a bite. It was the place with their favorite comics, the same familiar shop. Gus was curious about what the writer had written. The writer mentioned books, movies, TV shows, but mostly focused on films. Gus couldn't help but be impressed. So, how did he become a screenwriter? The writer's memory of that moment was vague. He could only remember that it happened when he was growing up. At Gus's age, the writer had made a decision. He would show all the kids who teased and bullied him that one day they would look up to his achievements. He dreamed of becoming a successful, wealthy figure. But looking back, he realized he had spent so much time trying to prove himself, and in doing so, never lived for himself. Gus, too, dreamed of becoming a comic book artist, a profession that could make him a lot of money. The writer encouraged him, telling him to chase his dreams. As they were about to leave, Gus grabbed a toy soldier from the shelf. With the writer's witness, he handed over a coin to the shopkeeper, vowing never to take anything for free again. They went to the backyard and buried the soldier in the ground, thinking they might dig it up next week to uncover a lost treasure. The writer, like a father figure, stayed by Gus's side. Not only did they read and listen to each other's thoughts, but they also played together, something Lou never did. Meanwhile, Lou was watching through the window, observing the rare father-son-like bonding moment. That evening, the writer returned to his hotel feeling unusually weak. He was greeted by a sharp knock on the door. When he responded, Lou stormed in, furious. While he appreciated everything the writer had done, he made it clear that the writer had no right to interfere in his family. Gus had calmed down. He was no longer fighting or stealing, but that wasn't the point. Lou had tried and failed to understand Gus's feelings, and as his son grew older, he became more rebellious. Lou couldn't control him anymore. The writer apologized for the earlier tension, and Lou didn't hold it against him. Instead, Lou confessed that he was envious of the bond between the writer and Gus. He and Gus were so alike, and while it wasn't right to vent his anger in this way, that's just how he was. Finally, the writer, with the weight of unspoken words, spoke up about his own past. He admitted that he, too, had been a troubled child. He and his father never talked until the day his father suddenly left his life, too late for any regrets. That was when the writer realized his father had been a gentleman, and he firmly told Lou that his father would have been proud of him now. With a shaky voice, the writer apologized again, assuring Lou that he never intended to interfere in his family. For some reason, Lou was deeply moved by this. The writer was truly a good person. The next morning, the writer came to say his final goodbyes to Gus. His body was growing weaker and he no longer belonged in this place. He needed to return. Gus, confused, asked if he could come along. After being told no, Gus promised to focus on his studies. The writer gently but firmly rejected him again, explaining that where he was going, Gus couldn't follow. Gus's emotions flared up. His mind shut out all explanations, and he broke free from the writer's grip. In a fit of anger, he declared that he didn't need help and was going to become someone important, someone whose success would force others to take notice. Gus said when they meet again, the writer would come up and shake his hand, and then he would punch the writer. After saying that, he ran off before the writer could stop him. As Gus ran away, the writer remembered their shared past. He realized now that the reason he ran away from home wasn't because of anyone else. It was because of his own actions. The writer, exhausted, finally let his body give in to fatigue and closed his eyes. When he woke up, he found himself back in the present. The dark clouds had vanished, the lights in the house were gone, and the broken swing swayed in the breeze. The writer tossed the toy soldier back into the ground, no longer needing to carry it. He had become the person he had always wanted to be. The people from his past no longer mattered. Even if they were still alive, they would have forgotten these small moments. But the writer had proven himself with the time he had left. If given the chance to return to the past, he knew it wouldn't change anything. He was the master of his own fate. As the writer got into a taxi and instructed the driver to take him to the airport, he noticed the driver's name. It was the name of the bully leader who had once bullied him. The man thought he recognized the writer, but the writer just smiled and shook his head. At that moment, the writer found peace in the world. The 21st story begins with a food critic, Harry, who didn't hesitate to write a false report in his quest to boost newspaper sales, slandering a well-regarded Chinese restaurant. Even though he had never actually dined there, it didn't stop him from listing it as one of the death trap establishments in his collection of malicious reviews. A man nearby warned him that this was unethical, but Harry brushed it off, claiming that there was no fairness in the world. Soon after, Harry arrived at the restaurant following the address he had used in his review. The owner personally served him a dish with his signature soy sauce, but Harry insisted on paying immediately. The owner's smile vanished, and he asked if something was wrong and if he was not satisfied. But Harry stuck to his decision, insisting on paying right away. The waiter, confused, had no choice but to take the dishes back. Harry couldn't hide his smug expression. Just then, a small dessert was brought to the table. The owner wasn't going to let Harry pay for a meal he didn't enjoy, so there was no bill. Instead, the owner placed the dessert on the table, explaining that it was a special compensation for not enjoying the food, a very special lucky dish, meant only for the most special customers. Harry opened the note inside the dessert, which read a generous reward was waiting for him. His eyes lit up as he pocketed the note, satisfied. The owner gave him a knowing smile. Not long after Harry left, a man in the alley bumped into him hurriedly and ran off. The police soon arrived and found a cloth bag on the ground. Inside were diamonds worth $100,000. For his trouble, Harry would receive a reward of a few $1,000s. He was stunned. The note had come true. He had indeed received a generous reward. The next morning's newspaper featured the same slanderous article about the restaurant, and yet Harry walked back into the restaurant. It was then that the owner recognized him as the infamous reviewer. The newspaper was filled with negative comments, and many readers had already called to complain. The restaurant had always been highly regarded, but Harry refused to listen. Harry promised he would rewrite the review next week, but demanded a single table and a fortune cookie for dessert. The owner's expression darkened. Harry seemed determined to test his luck. He sat down and ordered, though the lavish food remained untouched. When the fortune cookie finally arrived, Harry eagerly cracked it open. The message inside told him that the arrival of April would bring him love. Harry was confused, since it was now September, so this wealth meant nothing to him now. The owner reassured him that he had already received what he deserved. Angrily, Harry replied that his review would stay as it was. Despite the threat, the owner's demeanor remained ominously calm. When Harry stepped outside, he accidentally bumped into a woman and was immediately struck by her beauty. She was running late for an interview and couldn't find the building where the news office was located. Conveniently, it was the same building where Harry worked. Harry gladly offered to show her the way, and the two quickly made their way to the building. Harry then invited her to dinner, and she happily agreed. As he walked away, eagerly anticipating their dinner, he suddenly realized he didn't know her name. She smiled and introduced herself as April. That's when Harry understood the meaning of the fortune cookie. It wasn't referring to the month of April, it was the woman's name. That evening, Harry took April back to the Chinese restaurant, where another lavish dinner was waiting. April eagerly praised the food while Harry, still not eating, waited for the most important part, the dessert. The owner brought 2 fortune cookies to the table. After Harry's introduction, April quickly opened hers. The note inside read that she would soon realize the serious mistake she had made. This time, the fortune was unlike any he had ever received before. In a panic, he checked his own cookie, and to his shock, it read that he was going to die. Enraged, Harry grabbed a waiter and demanded an explanation. April, confused, wondered what was going on, especially with Harry causing such a scene in the restaurant. Harry refused to listen to any reasoning. All he wanted was for the owner to come out and give him some answers. April, clearly uncomfortable, didn't want to stay any longer. It was obvious that Harry wasn't someone she wanted to be around, so she quickly grabbed her coat and left with her sexy body. The owner then emerged from the kitchen. Harry began angrily shouting at him, but the owner remained silent, acknowledging that this was all part of the wealth Harry had been promised. He had been warned that he would only receive what he deserved. Harry, still greedy, continued demanding more. Faced with the death threat on the note, he planned to bring his friends from the health department to shut the place down. There was no longer any need for this restaurant to stay open. Through it all, the owner remained silent, but this time, his eyes held a different look. As Harry stepped out of the restaurant only a few steps away, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his stomach. It felt as though everything inside him had disappeared, and he had never been so hungry in his life. Turning around, he saw the neon sign flashing wildly. The lights triggered an uncontrollable craving for food. If he didn't eat something soon, he felt as though he might die of hunger. Desperate, he went back into the restaurant, but this time the atmosphere was eerie and unsettling. Harry didn't even care about the pale, ghostly faces around him. He was too focused on his desperate hunger. The man behind the counter moved in a strange, unnerving way, but Harry was oblivious, stuffing food into his mouth without even tasting it. Another dish was brought out, and he quickly grabbed it with his hands, devouring it as though his throat was closing up. No matter how much he ate, he couldn't stop. His hunger was insatiable, and despite the pain in his stomach, he kept going, unable to resist the pull of his body's cravings. Finally, the last course arrived. It's his favorite, the fortune cookie. He eagerly opened it, only to read the words that he was dead like a piece of shit. Harry shook his head, refusing to accept the truth, but it was futile. Whether he died from hunger or from overindulgence didn't matter anymore. As he went to pay, he realized that he had already sealed his fate. He had unwittingly buried himself in the graveyard of his collection because all the food he had consumed had been made in the underworld. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.